The talk show Africa Now airs Wednesdays at 1 p.m. It's a modern view on historical issues concerning the entire African world, addressing how African people are participating in globalization, ways in which the rest of the world continues to exploit African resources, uncovering labor violations by corrupt politicians and Western government powers. Learn what's happening now in interviews with artists, activists, scholars, and a host of other experts each episode. Listen Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Africa Now is also available on iTunes Podcast, Google Play Music, as well as SoundCloud on your station for jazz and justice, WPFW, Washington.
Good morning. Welcome to What's at Stake. I am the Reverend Braylon Scott Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month. Our executive producer is Verna Avery Brown, and it's so good to be back with you once again. And these have been some troubling times, been some times that have been so much out of the ordinary, so very different than any other time, with a pandemic and the continued pandemic of police killings and police misconduct. And things have been going on, breaking in the news just about every day. I'm so thankful to all the people who continued to be out on the streets, pressing the case against racism and white supremacy. I'm thankful for all of the allies who have responded worldwide, not only in this country, but worldwide, to oppose racist violence. Marches in places like Seoul, South Korea, and in Australia, and places like that, and to the Netherlands. People standing up, saw people in Palestine immediately responding to what they saw come across the wires and across the media that basically continue to expose the pernicious nature of racism and white supremacy. Then we saw the stuff of this so-called president. We saw the stuff of what he is made of. And what I mean by that is he cowered in a bunker the night before. And then when reports of that went out in the media the next day, a Monday, he decided that he was going to be under armed guard. An armed guard was going to attack peaceful protesters, that they were going to attack with the Secret Service and the National Guard protesters out there in the streets. And so they lobbed tear gas and they fired rubber bullets. And people were shocked all over the country to see that reaction. And then I'm thankful the next day that the crowds just grew in size in response to this so-called president. But he cleared the way of demonstrators to make his way across the park and to stand in front of a church and to hold up a Bible. Today we're going to have some discussion about this, the use and the manipulation of religion in this country for the oppression of others. And we are joined today by two preachers that I highly respect, Reverend Dr. Earl Trent, who is the pastor of Florida Avenue Baptist Church and has been very, very engaged always in the social justice movement and bringing about the issues of justice, of always standing up. And then we'll be joined later on by Reverend Patricia Fears, who is the pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church. Reverend Trent, are you on the line?
Good morning. Yes, I am. Morning, Reverend.
Good morning. I want to get into this discussion because you being a comrade, a person who was in the ministry, what was your reaction when you saw this man go across the park, clear out peaceful demonstrators, and then hold up a Bible? What occurred to you?
I saw that as the ultimate act of desecration for the Christian faith, but I also saw it as the revelation of truly the racist faith and those who support him, because having studied George Kelsey's book Racism and Christian Understanding of Man, Martin Luther King's premier teacher, he speaks about racism being a faith, a search for meaning. And in the same way that they say COVID-19 has pulled the covers off, that act showed us that this man is, that he is practicing a faith of racism along with many of the white evangelicals.
And that's interesting, because I think that one of the things that I want to sort of get at a little bit here is that you raised up the issue around white evangelicals as if somehow they're different in terms of Christians and Christianity. Can you help folks understand? Is there a difference?
Oh, there's a marked difference. There's a marked difference. The white evangelical faith, and that covers a range of what we might call denominations or conventions, Southern Baptist, non-denominational, Pentecostal. But the key is they're a key part of his constituency. 82% of them voted for him, and even now, most of them continue to support. Well, it's the same. Their roots are the same as those who supported slavery, justified it, and practiced many of, if you read the slave accounts, many of those who were owners of the plantations were not only Christians but clergy, and and what they did was they were some of the worst masters, and what we're looking at is a faith that is really idolatry. They have substituted they substituted something man-made and practiced this superior race mentality over against the gospel. So so what we see is that his support is from those who see themselves as part of this superior race, and that everyone else is less than, subhuman, outrace. That's what Kelsey calls it, the outrace. And so that allows them to do and say things to others that are despicable. And you notice his language. These were thugs. They weren't people. They weren't he doesn't even use protesters. They were thugs. They were Antifada. He puts all these labels, vilifies them, and then we get this, and there are those who go along with them because it allows them to do things that you wouldn't do if you saw a person as a child of God.
I saw a little video clip from one of these evangelical communities just yesterday, where they were interviewing each other, and one of the so-called preachers said to the other, they said, well, what has been exposed in these last few days has been the hypocrisy and the agenda of the left. Is that they don't want us to go to churches and they don't want us to open businesses, but on the other hand, they have allowed Black Lives Matter to stand shoulder to shoulder in the streets. And this shows you how godless this left is. And they went on down there, and then they started speaking in tongues. And what hit me about that, Reverend Trent, is how they pick up a political line that absolutely makes no sense and run with it. Can you help us understand how folk can be so illogical?
Well, what they're saying, is it only makes sense if the left of those persons aren't people. What they're doing is they're looking at this and saying, okay, we are the people, we are the norm. What we believe is reality. Okay, and so you can't come back on them. It's a faith statement. It's a faith system. So that allows them to look at others and see them as abnormal, illogical, because that's their belief system in reality. And there's a consistency in that. I mean, these are the same folks that when the administration started putting these kids in cages and shipping them all over, sending them all over the United States, deporting them, breaking up families, even though they say family is the most important thing. That allows them, because they see themselves as the reality, as the superior race. Then everything else is something else, and so we get this illogical, indecent corruption of human beings in their sight. So I'll use a religious word. It's demonic.
And I think it's also interesting because the way we get diluted in this culture is folks will say, well, so-and-so is a reverend, so we should listen to them. Or they're Christians, so we should listen to them. Or that type of stuff. So a non-discriminating ear and eye that basically the masses pose towards religion in this country. And in fact, some of the so-called faith things really are clothed in the biggest hatred. Can you talk about that? If you're just tuning in, we're talking with Reverend Dr. Earl Trent, who is the pastor of Florida Avenue Baptist Church, and I'm Reverend Graylin Scott Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month on What's at Stake. You're listening to What's at Stake on WPFW. Reverend Trent, can you comment on that? This sort of this non-discriminatory way in which the masses have been trained to look at religion?
Yeah, we have. This comes up because, as you know, religion, regardless of the religion, has always been used as a cloak for human behavior, human greed. It's always been used to manipulate the masses of people. They use it as a cloak. Now, what Isaac says, good religion. And good religion has, we see it in the human behavior. The Holy Spirit, have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Well, that was not sung in the presence of the master. That was sung in the hush harbors, as they saw their identity caught up in seeing the difference between the religion that's painted in the same way that we're seeing it now. Now, just like, I guess.
So there is this marked difference.
Sure. But you have to look. But it looks at the behavior. Your faith, my faith. You can tell my faith by what I do, what I say I believe, and then where's the consistency? Yeah, there may be some inconsistency there because we're human. We all fall short. But there is a line of consistency between what we profess and what we live, and the acts that we do, the language that we use, the things that we accept and we don't accept. There are some principles there, and that's what we have to look at. It's too easy to just think, well, it's all Christian. No, that's not the case. You have to look for that consistency between what we profess, right, and what we do, what we say, how we live, and that becomes the point of judgment.
Right. Now, Paula White got her start on BET, and she's now an advisor to the president, and she made the comment when this so-called president was elected that finally Jesus has come back to the White House. You want to comment on that?
I can't comment in language that is appropriate for radio waves. Yes. Well, yeah. Well, again, a consistency between her and the prosperity gospel, which is really, let me use religion to justify my greed. And yes, in that sense, that's what they were applauding. They were not applauding the Jesus of Matthew 25. What is your ministry to the least of them? Have you visited those in prison? Have you fed those who are hungry? Are you taking care of those who are sick? Are you are you concerned about the widows and the orphans and those on the margins of society? She wasn't talking about that. She was talking about the one who says, he was talking about enlarge my territory so that I might prosper. And,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, there's a whole part of that where it's really market theology. It's capitalist market theology that really has very little to do with anything that's divine or holy or sacred. Am I right?
Oh, that's quite correct. And that's what we saw when he crossed and he stood in front of the church. You might have been elected president, but you are not the bishop. You're not the archbishop. You're not an imam. You're not a rabbi. So he stood in front of the church and usurping, violating that line between sacred. He said, "This is not sacred. This is here for me to manipulate." And I think anyone of faith should have been deeply disturbed to see him cross that line. The sacred, you don't play with this. This is not a plaything. This is not something that you use to simply manipulate people. The moment you see that, you know that there's nothing there's nothing that he is doing that has anything to do with the divine, the sacredness of the holy. It should have, and I think in some sense it has raised those who are kind of sitting on the fence that something is deeply wrong here.
Something is deeply wrong, because the thing is that anybody that had any ounce of civility in them, first of all, don't even have to be religious. Ounce of civility. The fact is that he used law enforcement and he used National Guard and bombs and helicopters in the air to basically push people so that he could make his way and try to look as if he's macho after it got out that he was hiding the night before. I mean, anybody would sit up there and say for him to hold up his Bible is just really a statement that he's making to his base, to his so-called religious base, that I'm holding the Bible, because he didn't even have anything of significance to say, if you notice. He just held up the Bible, wasn't even his Bible. And as I heard somebody say, the fact is that he held up the Bible when he probably needed to open up the Bible and read it. He held up the Bible because it's definitely not in his heart. So it's something that only he can hold in his hand, and he don't even hold it the right way.
And, it is disturbing because his supporters, particularly those who claim a Christian faith, his supporters, they didn't. There was no outcry. There was nothing said. You had a smattering of one or two who made a statement, but others that generally make statements, even they were silent, because he crossed a vital line between that which is sacred and holy. You don't go into anybody's temple, mosque, church, and do what you will, project yourself as a leader, and then walk out.
Now, Reverend Trent, go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
And you don't brutalize people who are law-abiding citizens. With military force, like with a secret police, with a secret police, no names, no badges, nothing to identify them.
Any dictatorial regime knows that tactic, that you have nothing to identify folks. We don't even know if they're law enforcement or if they're right wing supremacists. We have no idea of knowing whether somebody's actually sanctioned out there as law enforcement or they come from one of these right wing militia groups. There's no way to tell.
Where they just hired mercenaries. I've done a lot of work in Haiti, and that was that's what they do. You get a secret police. You hire out folks to carry out your vile deeds, and that's exactly what happened and then pull the church to cover it. And that's
right.
And that's the disturbing part. That's everyone ought to be. If he violated the Constitution in the separation of church and state. He violated the Constitution in violating these rights and having a private militia.
Mm-hmm. Now, Reverend Earl Trent, I want folks to know a little bit about you. You're not only the pastor of Florida Avenue Baptist Church, but you've been engaged nationally as well as internationally in many different issues. Can you just tell folks a little bit about your credentials, particularly in terms of the national, international work you've done?
Okay. Well, I have served as the executive director for missions for the Progressive National Baptist Convention. I'm also the past chair of the board of Church World Service, an international aid organization. We one of our principal features is disaster relief, is refugee resettlement. One of the three organizations, there were 9 organizations, but to help to resettle refugees who are coming from other countries, helping to vet them, that whole process. Being part of I also chair the board of Harvest Institute, highlighting the work of Dr. Claude Anderson, Black Labor, White Wealth, and Powernomics, and just trying to help people in their development, trying to help Black people, and then working locally with my goodness, labor unions from UFCW, Local 400, nurses. It's kind of hard to go through a resume, but I think that's
right. And I stress that because it's sort of like you're not one of these armchair folks. You're out in the streets. Reverend Trent is a native of East Orange, New Jersey, and a graduate of Cornell University with a BA. He holds an MAT degree in English from Monmouth College, and he's also a graduate of Andover Newton Theological Seminary, and he also where he was a Benjamin Mays Fellow. In 94, he graduated from United Theological Seminary in Dayton with a doctorate of ministry degree. I'm just so proud to call him my friend because he's always engaged in so much that he keeps us always on the edge. And I believe if you're just tuning in, you're listening to WPFW. This is What's at Stake. We're talking with Reverend Dr. Earl Trent from Florida Avenue Baptist Church. I'm the Reverend Graylin Scott Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month. And I think we've been joined by Reverend Patricia Fears. Is that correct? Are you there, Reverend Fears?
Yes, I am.
How are you today?
I am blessed. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with such powerful engagers of the community.
And I'm wondering what occurred to you when you saw this so-called president walk out in front of this church and hold up a Bible?
The first thing that struck me was revelation is real. If we do not see now, will we ever see? The scale should have fallen from our eyes that his base, whatever that is, that claims to be evangelical, have no idea what the church is. It is strictly a political movement. I was hurt and mortified as I saw the peaceful protesters being just scattered around and being, I love the term, when we didn't have tear gas, we had an eye-irritating agent. I was like, isn't that not the description of tear gas? I was just like, the language. And I appreciate I'm on the phone with my Jersey homeboy and an English major, too. To craft the words in such a way to think that we are that ignorant is just infuriating. My blood boiled because I said, what an abomination And what an affront to the church. It's almost like putting on, now we're in the world of all of this technology. We have been before we got to the streets, where you have virtual backgrounds. He could have just stayed in his office and done a virtual background, because what he did was such an offense to this nation, and offense to anybody who proclaims Christianity as their faith, anybody who proclaims a faith movement. It was just an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment. It's just almost, how did this man get into office?
And that's exactly what we've been talking about, Reverend Fiers, is this difference in theological approaches, this difference in the church, because people want to always talk about the church with a broad brush, but there's some radical differences that exist, and it's the schism in the ideology and the theology of the church has become very, very, very apparent these last few years. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's, in some instances, in my particular denominations, we add by subtraction. We add new churches by separating from other churches. We multiply by division, all that other good stuff. But the reality is the theological notion of not being in line with God is just has gone so over the top. These schisms have come, and this president is the king of division. He divides on everything. And now to think that he's even been able to make people think that God is looking for people who will come in and obliterate the weak so that his strength could be realized is amazing to me. I'm just like, what Bible are you reading? And I know there's many versions of it. But the reality is we have to get focused on the root, the very core of what God is and how he moves in our lives. And for him to have taken and just co-opt the church is just an affront.
You're listening to the voice of Reverend Patricia Hales Fiers, and she is the pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church. And let me tell you a little bit about her. She completed her BA degree in English from Spelman and received her Master's of Divinity degree from Wesley Theological Seminary. She is the second pastor, if I'm not mistaken, of Fellowship Baptist Church, called there in October of 2016. And she was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, but has called Washington, D.C. home for many, many years, moving down here with her father, who was also a well-known preacher and a leader, organizer. And Reverend Fiers always continues to be on the cutting edge. She's a founder of what was the group, Sister Clergy? Is that correct? Sister Clergy. And so really sort of looking at it from the perspective of being a woman, being a black woman in the church, and lifting up the voices that we all need to be more receptive of. So we got two dynamic folks on there, because I really want to say that there are more and more of these very credible voices, very credible people in our pulpits who are concerned about the community and have a passion for the community, and I'm just glad to be on the air with two of them right now today. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to What's at Stake on WPFW. I'm the Reverend Graylin Scott Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month. Our executive producer is Verna Avery Brown, and Michael Nasala is our engineer in the studio. We have Reverend Dr. Earl Trent from Florida Avenue Baptist Church on with us, and Reverend Patricia Hales Fiers, who is the pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church, on the line with us. Let me go back to you really quickly. Reverend Trent, you heard what Reverend Fiers have to say. Anything you want to sort of add into what she is saying to us today?
Well, I agree with her. I agree totally with her. We're in disturbing times, and it was just such an affront, a desecration. But we now see those who bow at the altar of idolatry, and practice a racist faith, and everyone who is truly Christian needs to be respected responding to, has to respond. I think it's a moral imperative at this point.
And before we get ready to go to our community calendar, but before we go to our community calendar and take a break, and I want y'all to stay on the air, to stay on the line. I want to ask you this before we take that break, for each of you to answer it sort of very briefly. What would you say to those who are protesting in the streets? What would you have to say to them today?
The first thing I would say is thank you. Thank you for being the legs and the arms of those who cannot get out. Thank you for keeping the pressure on. Thank you for doing that which you do. Please know that you have people standing beside you in spirit, and those who are working on strategies to keep you whole while you continue that great and good fight. But with all of my heart and soul, I thank you, because enough is enough.
Amen. Amen. Reverend Trent?
To the protesters, I simply encourage you to continue to keep the pressure on. This is a long fight, and I was particularly impressed to see those who stood out in the rain, who continued in the rain, and to know that you stand in the shoes of those who were protested in Montgomery. That boycott lasted for 381 days. So it's that spirit that you embody and continue on, because we are going to need it in various ways. We may have to change tactics, but we need that spirit, and so God bless them.
Amen, amen. Stay on the line. When we come back, I got some other questions to ask, but also I want to invite the larger audience to get engaged in the conversation. You can join in the discussion at 202-588-0893. That's 202-588-0893. We will take a break and hear our community calendar.
6 feet, that's what social distance means. Back up and practice social distancing.
Hello, my name is Dr. Reed Tuckson, former health commissioner and a member of the Black Coalition Against COVID. The devastation from this COVID pandemic continues throughout our community, and we must maintain our vigil. Unfortunately, some of us are relaxing and opening the door for the virus to spread. Our coalition is sponsoring the first ever I Mask for DC Video Festival, which we broadcast citywide on June 26th, and will award cash prizes for the best 30-second videos produced on iPhones that teach our community why we must wear our masks every time we go outside. All videos must be submitted by noon on June 20th to be eligible. Go to our website, blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org. Remember, this ain't over. WPFW, your station for jazz and justice, serving the collective need and imagination of the community.
We are the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
On June 20th, we will rise together for the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital justice gathering.
On June 20th, we will come together to lift the voices and faces of poverty in the midst of pandemic.
Rise with us. Visit June2020.org. WPFW, your station for jazz and justice, serving 100% of the 99.
You have been listening to What's at Stake on WPFW 89.3 FM. I'm Reverend Graylin Scott Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month. Our executive producer is Verna Avery Brown. Michael Nasala is with us in the studio as our engineer. And we're talking to Reverend Patricia Fears, pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church, and also Reverend Dr. Earl Trent. And we're inviting the community to get in on the discussion with us at 202-588-0893, 202-588-0893. I'll go to a caller right away. I know a caller's just called in. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Reverend Hagler.
Good to hear your voice.
This is Rick calling you long distance from Germany.
Yes, sir. All right.
I think that holding up a Bible without saying anything for Trump, this seems to me to be a dog whistle that says to his base, I am hard on gays, I'm hard on Muslims, and I'm hard on poor people who are supposedly poor because they're lazy. What do you say about gays, Muslims, and poor people there in America?
All right, good question. Good question. Go to Reverend Fears and go to Reverend Trent on that question. Thank you for calling in.
Absolutely. I think that that's an excellent question. I think that as personally, that it's a non-issue for me. I look at human beings. I'm not looking at all of the segments and that we sometimes put ourselves in as far as what the president is saying. I think that raising of the Bible was a declaration to him that if you're not with this book, you're not worth having the conversation with. Now, if you're the color of the book that I'm raising, I got a problem with you. I really don't care about the poor, which was indicated by the clearing of the way. And that's what he does. He clears the way to make himself present. So those are the things that I saw in that moment, and those are the things that I think that he may have been posturing for. His mind is so confused and so confusing that I try not to go into that toxic water.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Trent?
I think you're quite correct in that it was more than a dog whistle. It was a symbol, and it was symbolic that he did not open nor read nor quote anything within the scriptures, because it wasn't about that. It was about looking at others who are not like him, not of European descendants, and not blonde hair, blue eyes, and everyone else. It doesn't matter whether you're Muslim, gay, black, brown, Asian, Native American. Anyone else is subhuman, and so and that's what he was trying to convey. That those of you who keep this Bible in this pristine condition on your coffee table and never read it, I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to answer the call as well, because one of the things that I think that we forget, that there is a theology of liberation and there's a theology of oppression. And most of us, I know us on this call, we're called into a theology of liberation, to set the oppressed free, recovery of sight to the blind, to announce this is the time of God's favor, to really declare that those who've been shackled by culture, those who have been shackled and put down by society, we're called to set free. In many ways, we're called to be the counterculture to what exists. And if you look at the text, all the vital texts, I don't care just about what major religion you're talking about, major faith you're talking about, but it all talks really about the freedom of people in the face of that which is divine. And so we have to stand against all of this nonsense that's going on, all of this hatred that is going on, all of this white supremacy, because we got to remember that the Ku Klux Klan came out of the church, right? And all those types of things as a part of U.S. history. As folks, I remember Howard Thurman talking about his grandmother, and his grandmother talked about how every Sunday the slave master brought the slaves together and read the part from Paul that said, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters," and forget about the rest of anything else in the scriptures. And that's been a part of the kind of hypocrisy that has been taught to this country, that we just sort of go along and we tolerate injustice. But it's time that we wake up, and we wake up theologically, and we wake up spiritually and ideologically, and we move against those things that oppress people. I invite the callers to call us from the community, 202-588-0893. We invite you to be a part of this conversation, 202-588-0893. And how would you define a theology of liberation, Reverend Fears?
I think you touched on it quite well when you talk about the call that to set the captives free. This notion of liberation is to not just break us out so we could just run rampant. This is a liberation not only of spirit and mind, but of body, and it is a call to recognition and self-definition. Who are we? To us. Allow us to define ourselves and not be defined as you have defined as oppressor. So this is an opportunity for us, and that liberation piece moves us away from this captive notion of your definition of us into the ability to self-define and engage with you in a way that is non-combative, but it is moving us all to that one place. I was sharing with a colleague just the other day. I said, it is time for us to come to grips with the fact that we are requesting, demanding, insisting on a level playing field that with a horizon in front of us that is not a hierarchy of oppression. We're all going to get there together. There's something we all strive for together, and that is a peace and love, because that is the quintessential definition of righteousness, is peace. So let us get there. And so for me, that liberation is really moving us, to that level of righteousness and equality.
And I know that we're part of a clergy fellowship, interfaith, really clergy fellowship, that just put out a statement around the demonstrations and all that's been going on and what we saw out there. And I don't expect you to read the statement, but just give a quick summary of what's being put out, Reverend Fears.
Okay, the statement basically acknowledges the fact that we are in this season that needs correction. And during this time, there are certain things that we are demanding take place. That includes the defunding and of the police department, to remove the militarization of the police. It also is asking that we don't celebrate these police officers. They don't get paid vacation when they do egregious offenses onto the citizens. They were also asking for reparations. We want it to be acknowledged that police brutality and this oppressive regime that seems to be, that permeates all police forces, has a public health issue that develops in these communities where fear and stress and anxiety is pronounced and always present. We're also asking it to be addressed in some retraining, and take that funding, not just to defund the police department, but to take those funds and really do some community engagement. We're also asking for you to look at the criminal justice system as a whole. Why are there more people of color in prison now than there were ever enslaved? And let's look at what happens to them.
Right, hold that thought, Reverend Fears. So we got some callers on the line. I want to go to the caller so we can join in the conversation. Good morning. How are you? Welcome to What's at Stake.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. This is a wonderful conversation you're having this morning. All of you.
Thank you.
I wanted to make a statement and about. I have difficulty saying his name, so I use what I always use. When 45 stood in front of the church with the Bible, I believe it was a cry for help, and that cry, and that cry was, when I look at the international diversity of the persons speaking out. I won't call it protesting, speaking out. When I look at the genders and when I look at how long they have been speaking out, we're losing this battle. And I need for you evangelicals to rally together, because we're going to lose this election. We're going to lose this persecution, worldwide persecution. We're losing, and I need your help. So this is my signal. Please get together. Please stay strong. Please stay tight so that we can win the battle and stay on top.
Amen. Thank you very much. Reverend Trent, you want to comment on that?
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it. It was a cry for help. It was a symbolic cry for help, and when you put it in terms of you look at the worldwide response, it was a cry of desperation because, yes, people are, quote unquote, woke. Let's stay woke. And they have a lot to fear because they've got everything to lose, and they will lose it.
And, and I think it's also clear that, people got to have more of a critical eye. And when I say critical eye, it's always interesting to me that we just go along with culture when actually our scriptural traditions should cause us to reevaluate and evaluate culture. Like I mentioned to the church on Sunday, I said, so why are we funding things that stand for our own oppression? We go along, we're having a good time. It's just like Dan Snyder of that Washington football team. I won't call the name because the name is a racist name. He's a big supporter of Trump, but we flock out there with our tickets and buying our paraphernalia and calling that racist name out loud of the team, and therefore we are funding our own oppression. Not only that, but Home Depot, this guy who stands up there, the Mr. Pillow guy, Lindell, with the cross hanging out of his collar. Folks are buying the pillow, say, oh, but he's a Christian. Yeah, he's the one that said grace came back to America when this so-called president was elected. This is the kind of right-wing nonsense that gets shrouded in so-called Christianity. And I just wanted to lift that up. I think we have another caller on the line. We want to go to that caller. Good morning. Welcome to What's at Stake.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Listen, I just had a few comments to make, and one of them I wanted to say was when President Trump first became president, he hadn't been president no more than 24 hours, and I called the Washington Post, and I was so upset, and I said, don't you have to have some credentials in order to be president? And the man just said to me, no. I said, you don't have to have know something about the job and everything, because when you apply for other jobs, you have to have experience or know something about the job.
You don't need anything to become president other than the fool voters. Go ahead.
Well, that's what I learned. And then the other thing is, I feel that he needs to be tested mentally because he may have signs of dementia. I'm about the same age as the president, and he's getting ready to have another birthday. And I'm going to tell you, to be honest, I'm not as sharp as I used to be. I used to be able to call off names, do this, do that, and I have to think a little bit. And I think that's what's going on with him. He's not as sharp as he used to be because he'll be 74 his birthday. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, he's upset with us about the impeachment. You don't impeach him. And so he's going to find some way before he leaves office to get back at us for attempting to, even though, he won because there's more Republicans in the Senate. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you for your comments. And let me say is that what sometimes we skate over is the racism and the white supremacy that is presented as a part of his political framework. If you remember, he started way back with Obama, questioning Obama's legitimacy as a U.S. citizen, basically claiming that he was from someplace else, and then claiming that he was not really a member of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, but was a Muslim. And so it was establishing him as a black Manchurian candidate that was going to come into the U.S. And the whole theme of making America great again was another dog whistle that was built upon racism and white supremacy, because somehow America had diminished itself because they had a black person for 8 years in the White House. Reverend Fiers, will you comment with your comments on this subject, particularly in response to what the lady just said?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the comment, the saying that came to mind when she was speaking was, once a man, twice a child.
Mm-hmm.
Agent Orange has always been like this. And so even if he is having a mature moment, he is going back to what he knows.
Need to point out that his father was like this.
Right.
His father discriminated against folks.
He grew up in a racist environment. His father was a Klansman. He was nurtured in that environment. And he has proved that. And his manhood, he became a huckster, kind of a Barnum and Bailey kind of guy, selling anything. And that's really what I think he was trying to do. He was trying to sell not only Dog Whistle, but just kind of put up an image that he think could capture some form of leadership. When you crawl out of the hole, you don't get to rise onto the mountaintop and get a picture. I think that he has missed the mark on so many levels. We know he's not qualified.
Yes,
I don't even like those I don't even like those conversations anymore. We know he has some sort of mental instability, but but we can't use that as the excuse. And those, even to me, those are like kind of soft shoeing over the fact that you are racist. And
right, we can't excuse it. We can't excuse it.
We cannot.
And you're listening to Reverend Patricia Hales Fears, who is the pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and also on the line with us is Reverend Dr. Earl Trent, who is the pastor of Florida Avenue Baptist Church. And I believe I'm going to go to a caller because we want to get the callers in. Good morning. Welcome to What's at Stake. How are you today?
Good morning. Excellent. And you, pastors, and the wonderful sister who reminds me of Nanny Helen Burroughs in her own way. This is your brother, Oduno, from the Southeast Tabernacle Baptist Church, where Pastor Isaac stands against the wall. And I would just like to say quickly, though it is important, to talk about 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It just so happened 80 years ago today, the Honorable Marcus Mosias Garvey elevated, June 10, 1940. 6 years later, Jack Johnson, June 10th, 1946. Both of them were on Monday. And what I would like to know, what would the God of Marcus Garvey and what was the God of Nanny Helen Burroughs say to the sitting president, as they said to the sitting presidents when they were very much alive, because they were preoccupied with building that community and building an internet.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time. I'm going to ask if Reverend Trent could respond to that very quickly and very briefly, and Reverend Fears can respond to that very quickly and very briefly.
Very quickly, I'll go to Daniel. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting.
Reverend Trent, there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. I think God is clearly saying that your leadership is an abomination. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Reverend Fears.
And I have to concur. That was the text that I was going to, Doc. Yes, you are not ready.
And so you have been listening to What's at Stake on WPFW. I'm Reverend Graylin Scott Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month. We've had as our guest Reverend Dr. Earl Trent, who is the pastor of Florida Avenue Baptist Church on Florida Avenue. And I need to also point out that he is one of the churches that went entirely solar to try to really be responsible to the environment. So not only liberation in terms of people's physical lives, but really trying to free the planet from its contamination by pollutants. And also on the line, you've been listening to Reverend Patricia Hales Fears, who is the pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Very dynamic preacher, leader, thinker, and one who really has the passion of the people at heart. Again, I want to thank our guests for being with us today. It was just wonderful to have you on here to have this conversation. I want to remind us that really what we're dealing with is and the attempt to always keep people down and to couch it in religious language. But we respond with a call for liberation, a call for empowerment, a call to lift up each other. So again, sisters and brothers, we will be back again, and I'll be back with you in a month from now. You've been listening to What's at Stake. We know that we have a lot to get done, and you know what? In faith, in hope, empowered by each other, we shall get it done. Take care.
6 feet, that's what social distance means. Back up and practice social distancing.
Hello, my name is Dr. Reed Tuckson, former health commissioner and a member of the Black Coalition Against COVID. The devastation from this COVID pandemic continues throughout our community, and we must maintain our vigil. Unfortunately, some of us are relaxing and opening the door for the virus to spread. Our coalition is sponsoring the first ever I Mask for DC Video Festival, which we broadcast citywide on June 26th, and will award cash prizes for the best 30-second videos produced on iPhones that teach our community why we must wear our masks every time we go outside. All videos must be submitted by noon on June 20th to be eligible. Go to our website, blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org. Remember, this ain't over. WPFW, your station for jazz and justice, serving the collective need and imagination of the community.
Mask up, 'cause I don't want your germs on me. I'ma need 6 feet and keep your mask on, please.
We are the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
On June 20th, we will rise together for the mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital justice gathering.
On June 20th, we will come together to lift the voices and faces of poverty in the midst of pandemic.
Rise with us. Visit June2020.org. WPFW, your station for jazz and justice, serving 100% of the 99.
Award-winning former police officer and criminal justice adjunct professor Garland Nixon hosts News Views Fridays at 6 p.m. Tune in to hear a refreshing angle on today's state of affairs and other issues other media intentionally overlook. Find the episodes on iTunes Podcast and Google Play Music. Only on your station for jazz and justice, 89.3 FM, Washington.
Your Rights at Work is the best weekly radio show on labor rights. The call-in talk show airs Thursdays at 1 p.m. on WPFW 89.3 FM. In affiliation with Union City Radio, a podcast produced by the Metro Washington Council, available on Stitcher's, iTunes Podcast, and Google Play Music. Subscribe for daily updates on D.C. area labor news, labor history events, and Labor Live at 5 shows. On your station for jazz and justice, WPFW Washington.
The jazz community has been hit hard by COVID-19. Musicians are usually the first line of defense when speaking truth to power, but often the last in line to receive relief. If you would like to learn more about how you could support the musicians in our community, I encourage you to visit www.capitolhilljazzfoundation.org. We will get through this together.